Hi everybody, and welcome to Orion Ornamental Irons March webinar. And this month our topic is the top 10 hardware mistakes to avoid. And we've got a really large group this month, which I'm really excited about. So today we're going to talk a bit about some of the mistakes that you can avoid when you're speccing and designing and installing drapery hardware. Some of those common mistakes. Going to see some interesting and images of MacGyvered looks and non-MacGyvered looks and bad installations and drapery hardware no-nos, along with some, I hope, some tips that'll help you avoid those. So let's just dive right in and see what we've got. First one, not choosing the right hardware. Now, you might have thought that the first one I would be thinking about would be measuring, and actually that's coming on down the line. But I think that you have to be making certain choices before you even can think about measuring the window and deciding what sizes you're going to use. So you're choosing the wrong hardware with whether it's the choice for the application. Maybe it's using a telescoping rod when they shouldn't. Maybe it's using lighter weight Travis rods for multiple widths when they should have used architectural tracker and ball bearing carriers. Maybe it's a wrong hardware style for whether it's for the drapery fabric, for the design, or for the room. Could be something as, you know, right now ripple folds are all the rage when it comes to drapery panels, but they're not always the right choice, particularly when you're working, for example, in polyester fabrics, because they never, ever hang properly or steam correctly. Wrong hardware choices in matching what you were wanting to do for good design intent. So usually, a lot of times choosing the wrong hardware really kind of comes back to the client, because the client's trying to save money. You're showing her some hardware. She's saying, do I really have to use the heavy-duty rod? Oh, why can't I order, you know, this pole that's telescoping? I saw it at Bed Bath & Beyond, and I think this is what I want. You know, I think as window covering pros, we, in some cases, just can't give the client a choice. We have to give them all the reasons they must choose your recommendation. And sometimes it means showing them visually or talking to them about what the worst case scenarios are. You know, we know that telescoping poles need more support brackets than solid poles. So if she's putting a telescoping pole over a sliding glass door, one center support isn't even going to do it. So not only does she have the issue with sliding it across the break and the split in the rod, but it's not going to hold up the treatment that she wants to use. You know, it's like also choosing, you know, the right rod and pole size, for example, with grommets. So it's really about educating the public, and that's really is part of our job. Here's an example. Found this just in a random magazine, and I found it interesting. Well, there's a couple of things happening here. Don't you like the feather boa tieback? But, you know, ceiling mounts, okay, get that. We've got wall mounts on the shears below, and I'm okay with, you know, the mixing of the pleated headers and everything. But first of all, there's no return on this scenario. So depending on where you're sitting over here in the room, you're seeing it doesn't come back to the wall, number one. And number two, see what they did here with the right panel is they didn't even bring it over into the soffit area. They brought it out. So not only are you getting light gap from up and above and around and no returns, they're just possibly wasn't the right hardware choice for the design intent in this particular room. Really what it comes down to is understanding the different types of hardware that are out there. And I know for some of you that have been in the business for a while, you're like, really, do we need to go over this? But, you know, there are some of us that are out there that are just getting into window coverings and window treatments. And so basically there's the white goods. The white goods are typically hardware components that are hidden, like curtain rods and Travis rods. And you know, your brackets, you can have cut to measure and architectural track also, both in curtain rodding and heavy duty tracking. And then you have your decorative looks, that finishing touch. In a lot of cases it replaces a top treatment. You've got it not only decorative Travis rods, which are sort of are semi-custom, but then you've got, you know, wooden poles, iron rods, brackets, hooks and rings, and even decorative traversing systems. So understanding the types of hardware that are available out there and then matching it up with the appropriate use and for your design intent and what your client's needs are is really where it all comes together. Put together this chart of different types of rods, also what weights they hold per foot. We'll talk more about drapery weights. I'm kind of on a drapery weight kick these days. Also bracket spacing, that really comes into account when you're ordering things, and then what they should be used for. So in other words, you don't want to be using a curtain rod to hold a grommet panel. Even if it's a cafe set, you just doesn't work all the times. And then some of the notes. And anybody who wants this particular chart, it'll be available on our website along with the video recording when we in the next 24 to 48 hours. There's also ready-made hardware. This is the cheapest, you know, it's pre-packaged, retailers sell it. It can't be bent or bowed, so you know what, if you've got a bay window or a bow window, ready-made hardware isn't for you. Cross that right off your list. This is your most economical choice. As I said, it's typically your curtain rods, your decorative curtain rods and cafe sets, maybe your drapery cranes, and it's your Travis rods. One thing I wanted to point out here, and I thought of this after I finished the PowerPoint presentation, is keep in mind with Travis rods that we have cords. So we fall into the whole cord safety compliance issue. There are new tension devices that have been added and are being packaged with Travis rods along with instructions on how to properly install them. And those two things must be done by the installer to be compliant. And as we all know, it's quite a fluid situation. By the end of this month, we might have a better idea where we're going with this. I believe the comment period ends next week. So Travis rods, one of the things you really need to keep in mind is then your pin setting, and especially if you're layering. Then there's semi-custom. These are bulk or prepackaged, but they come in predetermined lengths. It's like a 4-foot pole or a 12-foot pole. You buy your rings and finials separately. There's limited accessories. You also have decorative rods that are semi-custom. Typically they're plastic fascias and finials, but you've got carriers and corded versions, so it's easy for the client to use. For us in Orion, our sort of semi-custom line is our Iron Art line, our express line of, you know, basically it's a limited number of finials and finishes. Almost every drapery hardware manufacturer has some sort of semi-custom version to their brand. And then there's the custom. There's no waste. It's made just specifically for the window, less chance of error, harder to specify. It's not, you know, it's sold a la carte. So in other words, if you need 12 rings, you order 12 rings. You don't order 2 packages of 7 and have 2 rings left over. Then there's also no die lot variations in finishes. You can do custom wood, metal, French poles. French poles very popular these days from all the manufacturers. Iron, poles with tracks, whether you're doing pinch pleat or ripple fold. You can do traversing systems, both one-way draws left and right and center draws. These are definitely should be used when you've got multiple widths and lined and interlined draperies. And you can have cut-to-measure tracks. Maybe you're using cut-to-measure tracks under a valance for stationary panels, for example. And then you have your architectural tracks, your heavy-duty tracks. Second mistake, making the drapery hardware an afterthought. So I was browsing the internet just to see what was out there, and there's a lot of decorating blogs, as you all well know, that talk about window treatments. And I'm not here to call anybody out, so please don't take, I hope that no one's on this webinar and will take this wrong, but this was a DIY step-by-step blog that told her how to hang a valance, and I love that the quote is, "I screwed blocks of wood to the wall above the window and painted them out to match the walls so that my quote-unquote mishmash of drapery hardware wouldn't be so noticeable." So it's obviously, it was an afterthought. So as you can see, she put a block of hardware here, and by the way, this was meant to be a board-mounted valance, so she Velcroed the curtain rod and put the Velcro on the back of the valance. So it's put the drapery hardware to top of mind more often. Part of the things that happen when drapery hardware is an afterthought is the size of your rod and your rings. Make sure that you're, number one, if you're ordering the right ring for the right size pole. For example, sometimes you might be ordering a 2-inch wood pole from vendor X and then ordering the rings from vendor Y. Will they work? Every vendor has a different inside diameter ring, for example, or possibly the outside diameter of the pole. Is it 2 inches or is it 2 1/4? And also keep in mind that you want to use the correct pole so that it's in proportion with not only the window treatment that you're using, but in a proportion with the room and the scale of the treatment. For example, I found that this is an example where they used double twisted poles on this large window and then actually a different diameter pole for these smaller windows on the side. Not for everybody. Somebody might feel that that's a don't rather than a do, but it's always good to have some of these visualizations, again, when you're talking to your client about, particularly if you're in rooms working with assorted windows, whether they're tall or short or narrow, whatever it might be. Talking about rod diameter, my friends at Rowley Company, courtesy of them, gave this chart. Grommets always seem to be top of mind in social media these days on how do we do functioning or stationary grommet panels. This is a chart from Rowley that shows what your rod diameter is and then what size grommet you should be using for a stationary panel and for a functioning panel. And note that stationary panel grommets typically are smaller than what functioning. A rule of thumb when you're working with drapery hardware and grommets is that the grommet should be 40% larger than the rod diameter when you're working with it. Something to have, again, in your bag of tricks. Number 3, mounting the hardware in correctly. And again, this comes before the measuring because you have to make the decision about where you're going to mount this versus in what space do you have to mount it in it before you can even measure the window. So one of the things I did before the webinars, I kind of reached out to some of my friends and peers in the industry and asked them what common mistakes they see. So here are some quotes from some of the best in the industry that they shared with me. And I think this is so true, is that a designer doesn't necessarily understand how to properly determine finish length. And you need to know that, or you have to have the hardware and the rings on site so that you can give detailed specs not only to your workroom and other members of the team and your installer about where to mount it, but just even figuring out your own specifications. You know, it's like I think James, one of our installer friends, said, define what means hang as high as possible. You know, is there enough space to work in that, and where is that mounting going to take place? Interestingly enough, this picture, as you can see, is kind of out there in no man's land. It's not even at the top of the trim, not at the top of the window. It's kind of like hanging out there in space, so to speak. This is actually an advertisement, by the way, from a drapery hardware vendor. So it is about the space, the area being decorated, the space that immediately surrounds it. You've got to define those parameters. You can't usually determine that space, so you have to ask yourself, is there enough space to do what I want to do? And then you have to start making some decisions. Determine the area you want to cover. That's where you're going to measure for your rod face width. How far past the opening do I want to go? Can I go there? Is the treatment, functioning? Do I need to clear the glass because the customer said the view was paramount to her? What direction do I need to draw it? What hardware am I going to choose, and will it work at the ceiling? How many layers am I going to have? Am I having shears and a valance and over draperies? Well, all of a sudden I've got 3, maybe I have a wood blind underneath there, so now I've got 4 layers. Is that all going to work? So what's the footprint? Make those decisions before you measure. Know that typically you can mount inside, outside, on the frame or to the sill, which is never ever acceptable in my eyes when you're working with custom window treatments, unless you have some sort of obstruction. Typically we extend 4 inches above the window or 12 up to about 4 to 12 inches above the frame. This is maybe a bit too high in this picture. Or height reigns supreme, we start at the ceiling and we work down. Or you can even layer your mounting heights. But as I said, remember that you've got to mount at least 2 inches up for a standard center support bracket. So typically we want to mount 4 to 8 inches up from the frame. I like to start at the ceiling and work down. So don't do number 1, do number 2. Always check to make sure you've got room for your rod and finials. Here's another tip is try not to mount less than 4 inches below the ceiling. If you can't go to the ceiling, you want to go 4 inches or more below. So typically they split the difference between the top of the trim and if there's a crown or the ceiling. The reason you don't want to do less than 4 inches is you'll get a shadow cavity and it looks like you should have gone up but you didn't. Again, both width, what space you need to cover, and height. Here's some mounting examples. Interestingly enough, you don't even see the rod here, so it kind of feels like it's floating. Maybe that was the design intent. For some of you, if you wish that maybe you see a finial or something so that you know how it's mounted. Again, talking about, yes, height reigns supreme, but the question you have to ask yourself is this dimension in dead space from the top of the trim of the arch to the crown too much? Always sketch if you have to, if you're not sure, to visualize it, and sometimes that also helps the client. Or again, for design intent, you knew you were putting a shade, you were not putting it on the door, it was rectangular, so maybe a different style would have been different. I don't know, that seeing that shade and where it was mounted, or maybe bringing the rod down so that there feels like the shade and the rod are one is a better choice. I'm all for hanging rods wall to wall or around a room. I love that look, kind of thinking out of the box, but here you have an arch window, and my question to all of you is, what would you do? Would you stop the rod here and do a custom arch, or would you just stop the rod with a break? Lots of different issues, but I certainly don't know that I would have brought the rod across the arch. This is a great example of mounting everything at the same height when you have assorted windows and doors in a room. So obviously the doors are much higher than the window, so they did one rod in a corner with a corner piece. Love that. Creates, only one sight line. And then for good design intent, the whole idea of balance and not to make this room feel heavy toward the door side, they actually mounted a pair of draperies and a rod, and that's a piece of art. That's not a window. So again, you have to think about all those kinds of things, and again, think out of the box when you're thinking about drapery hardware. But always mount at the highest height when your windows vary, if you can. 4, measuring incorrectly. We all know the measuring of business of the basics, the baker's dozen, if you will. For those of you that don't do a lot of soft treatments, it's always good to revisit measures, 4 and 7 through 10, because you typically work on the window but not necessarily in the space that's around the window. So the first thing you really have to do is measure the windows and then make your adjustments about knowing now where you want to hang it and what type of hardware you're going to do. So that way it sort of saves you time and money. The one thing you also want to make sure is that your rod face width plus your finial is going to allow you to center a treatment if it's functioning, and you don't have to do offset panels. So consider the space around the window, the room it's in. Are there obstructions, vents? Are the floors and the ceilings parallel? Are the proper clearance for within the treatments? What about lighting fixtures or door swings? The wrong hardware style choice, don't make that decision based on the fabrics maybe that you've selected. A lot of times people suggest or choose a fabric, and make a wrong hardware choice. So also, is it functioning? How many layers? What's my stack? How am I mounting it? When you're measuring, keep these in mind. When you're doing rods and rings, there's 3 things you need to know. You need to know the height of the eyelet so you can figure your pin placement, right? Or your ring drop. Same thing here. You need to know where to mount the plate on the bracket to the pole. What's the mounting height and what's the bracket to the pole relationship in that mounting height? So what additions or deductions do you need to take? And then you need to know what your top or your center of your pole is to your eyelet for your hanging height. Again, always helps to have parts and pieces if you're not sure, and key sets or brackets. Frequently missed items, workrooms tell me, are usually that the details aren't spelled out. Particularly installers need to know that. What finish are you putting on things? The bracket to bracket, you know it. You just forgot to put it in on the measuring form or the work order. And then what your returns are and how you want to handle the returns. Number 5, not figuring drapery weights. As I said, I'm kind of on a soapbox lately about this because I've had to deal with this with several clients and explain to them what the issues are. Basically, as a designer or a window covering professional, you must know the weight limitations of each track that you're choosing. Okay? And every drapery hardware manufacturer can give you that information. It's either in the back of their price lists or their catalogs, or you can call them and ask them. You also want to keep in mind what bracket weights are. So for example, a 3-inch projection bracket might hold 20 pounds by that manufacturer, but a 6-inch bracket might only hold 10 pounds. And you're using a solid rod, iron rod, and you have a huge span on it. Again, that's going to fall into how many brackets do I need and how do I space them out. So I'm going to give you an example. Again, not calling anybody out, but just to show you why drapery weights are so important. So a smooth designer metal rod from Kirsch holds 0.9 pounds per foot. And the fluted rod only holds 1.5 pounds per foot. So that means that if you're doing an 8-foot wide window, 96 inches bracket to bracket, your drapery cannot weigh more than 7.2 pounds if you chose a smooth metal rod, or 12 pounds if you chose the fluted rod. Now, in an 8-foot drapery, that's 5 widths. At typically 3 yards. So you've got 15 yards of fabric. How you figure a drapery rate weights is taking your yardage that you're using for draperies and using this formula to calculate what your drapery is approximately going to weigh. So if I was doing a blackout or an interline drapery with lining, it weighs 1.5 pounds. Okay? So at 1.5 pounds at 15 yards, I'm at what, 20-some pounds. And what did I just tell you? The fluted rod only holds 12 pounds max. It's not the right rod for you. you need to move into something else, into another, or figure out whether you're going to put a lot of brackets on it to hold it. There's, again, that's a conversation you're going to have with your installer and with your drapery manufacturer. So you multiply the total yardage by one of the following. If you're just doing mid-weight drapery fabric and lining, it weighs 3/4 pound per yard. Regular drapery fabric that's blackout lined is a pound. That also basically holds true for nap sateen, by the way. Drapery fabric and blackout and interlining or lined and interlined is 1.5 pounds. So you can see at 35 yards, you've got like 50 pounds of drapery. How much will your rod hold? You need to know those things. And then if you didn't figure it right, or you didn't figure it at all, thank goodness for, I'm sorry I can't remember what the name of the installer is, for a good installer, because this happened to him, and he made it work so that the bracket wasn't pulling out of the wall, and the designer could collect the check. So when do you use traversing systems or heavy-duty systems? It's when the customer wants functioning treatments, because, by the way, they pull much easier than a white traverse rod. When your drapery specs like weights require it, or if you're doing motorization, if the design intent is that the hardware becomes the finishing touch of the top treatment, that might be a reason to use it. And then when you can offer solutions to the challenges that your client has in your basic projects. Something else is kind of tied in to drapery weights. Number 6 is not understanding what span or bracket-to-bracket maximum is. So bracket-to-bracket maximum or span is the point where the rod will start to sag or bow without any center support. Here are a couple of things to keep in mind in regards to that. The larger diameter of the rod, the more hanging weight you can put on that rod with less brackets. So again, if you know what your drapery weights are and you're trying to decide if you're going to use an inch iron hollow or an 1.25 inches, you know that the larger diameter is going to hold more weight. So you might move up into an 1.25 inches. Every rod needs a bracket at each end, duh, right? And you're going to probably need center supports. And you're always going to need additional brackets at splices and bends and angles. The length between two brackets, or that is called a span. So span maximum or bracket to bracket maximum. Rods become much more rigid also when they increase in diameter. So again, you get more rod strength, but again, that's dependent on your mounting surface. Are you anchoring it properly? So here's some suggested spans. A 1-inch rod, maximum span is 90 inches. 1/2 inch is 70. That's without any supports. But again, that also depends on whether it's hollow or solid, whether it's what type of surface it's into. But it does give you some sort of guidelines to start off as a starting point. Number 7, not choosing the right components. What's wrong with this window treatment? Well, first of all, these are cafe curtains for a continental rod, and they put it on a regular curtain rod. Visually, I don't know that it's mounted in the right place, but that's for another discussion in another webinar, I guess. But the idea here is, and this happens so often, even when customers buy ready-mades, they pick something up at a retail store and they don't buy the right hardware, and then, we have to install it or deal with it. I thought these were some interesting examples of maybe not the right components, but there was a better choice. So for example, obviously this is a DIY rod, and they're using an elbow and a pipe fitting, but guess what? The elbow is bigger than the rod diameter, and you just made the rod pocket for the size of the pipe, not for the elbow. Oh gosh, I can't even bring it around the return. Or isn't this an interesting sleeve? Because again, no returns are going to be available. You're only going to be able to go up to here on the bracket. And then, by the way, this bracket is being sold on Etsy, and it's one of their better sellers for window treatments. And it's an eyelet leather strap that goes into a command picture hook. Interesting, right? I know everybody's cringing when out there. So it's really all about what's the intent, what's the specialty application, do I have enough center supports, do I have the right bracket, do I need a return, do I need a corner swivel or a connector piece, or am I doing inside sockets? What is it? Or a baton if I'm hand drawing. Did I order and do I have all the right components to make this work? And part of that is choosing the right finial, because remember, finials can mount over the end of a pole. Sometimes they can mount flush to the pole. You need to know what your finial width, depths, and lengths and heights are, so that you can make sure that they're going to work. First of all, particularly if you're mounting at the ceiling, right? It can also affect your bracket projection. So if you're doing double finials, like on a double rod like here, and you've got a deep finial, it might not have enough clearance in the back to be screwed into this back rod. And you maybe only have to do an end cap versus 4 finials. Usually all those measurements are given in price guide. At one time, one of the drapery manufacturers used to do templates that you could hold up to the wall to see if it worked, and I always thought that was a really great idea. Maybe somebody will pick up on that and do that as a drapery manufacturer. Another component that's really important to have is your concealed tie-back holder. If you're doing tie-back draperies, you always need to order that, or ask your installer if he's supplying it on every tied-back drapery, because you don't want this crushed look. And that's all part of the drapery hardware. Also, pins. Are you ordering, and is your workroom using the correct pin for the correct drapery style? You know, for example, the reason this is round is because that goes on a curtain rod. And maybe you've run into the same situation where you have the pointed drapery pin and you're putting it on cut to measure track and it doesn't really fit well. So again, keep in mind pin sets and the correct pins. Speaking of pins, here's a couple of tips that I got from Facebook group that I'm active in and I always get great information from, and that is installing the return pin back to the wall. Do you use a tenter hook, an eye screw? Do you put a screw into the wall and put a pin on it to it? Here they're using a picture hanger, brass picture hanger, and or an extra slide, and I just thought those were 2 great tips. Number 8, ordering the right number of parts and components. So you need to know what your bracket spacing is, and you need to know your weight, so you know how far apart you're going to put your brackets. Typically, every type of drapery hardware has different maximums and minimums on bracket spacing. You need to know your pleat numbers. How many pleats are you having in your panels? Because that affects your ring number, right? Don't forget the leading edge. You need to know what accessory pieces you need to have. And, you know, again, if you're ordering 2-inch rings from one vendor and a 2 1/4-inch rod from the other, and you're wondering why they aren't fitting, well, again, you didn't order the right number or you didn't order the correct parts. Typically, brackets, I think, a good rule of thumb, are 36 to 40 inches apart. So that'll help you kind of as a guideline in getting the correct amount of brackets. But again, if it's heavy duty or there's some obstructions or whatever, that would change. Excuse me. And then you have to provide all that information to the members of your team, whether it's a workroom and an installer, whoever it might be, your drapery hardware vendor. Neglecting to talk to your installer, particularly on specialty applications prior to ordering, it is a big mistake, because you need to, you know, talk to them about what the material is. It going to work? Is my wood pole going to slide on my hand baton? Are you going to charge me more because it's a bay window and you're mitering and cutting? Or did I order enough brackets? And you know that way you can weigh your options and cost and convenience for the client and for you. So talking about numbers, and specifically ring numbers, what's wrong with this picture? Well, first of all, the return didn't go back to the wall, right? And typically, generally, this is too large of a span between the bracket and the base of the finial. Usually it's about 1.5 inches, correct? Or 1 inch, depending on your design intent. But you'd never have 3 rings between a bracket and a rod. So either the bracket was put in the wrong space or the rod was cut too long. I don't know, but usually you only have 1 ring there, right? And that affects your ring number. And don't forget about your ring on the leading edge, or in some cases some people use a ring and put it onto the bracket to hold a return. Remember that at 2.5 to 1 fullness, most workrooms have 5 pleats per width. And then you add your leading edge ring if you're doing a decorative or a hand, and then so take the number of widths times the number of pleats to get your ring number, and then add your leading edge. Projections and clearances, not understanding what those are. So projection is a distance from the face of the bracket to this, or the center of the rod back to the wall. Rod clearance is something entirely different. That's the distance from the back of your rod to the wall. The larger the rod is, the smaller the clearance, and that might be why your rod and rings won't move across the headrail of the duet that got installed after you did all your measuring and the client went ahead and ordered blinds on her own. So you also want to know about your returns. Your return is a direct relationship to the projection, but projection and returns are not the same. You know, will the chosen bracket work for what you need? Do you have enough brackets to hold the weight? Again, is the center support going to interfere with the movement? Understanding all these kinds of things and clearances and projections are also important, and some mistakes that we want to avoid. Just again, basics. A return is a fabric measurement. You always need a return. The last pleat is never on the edge of a drapery. It's at least a minimum of 1.5 inches in, because you have 1.5 inches side hem. It's your fabric measurement plus 1/2 inch is what you get your returns. So in other words, if your bracket that you're ordering is 3.5 inches, your return needs to be 4. Here's some return formulas regarding drapery returns when you start layering. You know, 0 returns actually means that you've got the last pleat and then 1.5 inches before the edge of the pleat. 3.5 to 4 inches on a single rod, 6 on double rods or top treatments, and 8 to 9 when you start layering shears and panels. A good rule of thumb is add 3 inches every time you add a layer to the window, and then make sure that you that they're going to function. If it's a lined and interlined drapery, you might need to add more, because the volume and projects not only further out from the rod, but also to the back of the rod. You just want to make sure that the layers are going to clear each other and hang correctly. If you have an over drapery and it's on a separate rod, you want to add 4 inches to your rod face, okay, 2 inches on each side. And if the layers are on the same rod, you would then have the same rod face. The idea here is, bottom line, just don't skimp on clearances. Same with figuring stack back. There's lots of different formulas, but you need to know if the client says, I need to clear the window, that means stack back, and if it's a functioning drapery, you need to add that for your rod face width. And number 10, not thinking out of the box. Couple of things to think about. Things that I'm seeing as trending that might work for you on your next project is, if height reigns supreme and we're moving from stationary treatments into a lot more functioning treatments, start thinking about being able to build out pockets with the crowns, particularly if you're coming in at the early beginnings of a remodel, renovation, or a new construction, because these can really they can hide all the underpinnings, allow you to use architectural heavy-duty tracks, give the customer function, view, and it's also beautiful. But remember, are your pockets deep enough? Also, you might want to throw some things in your designer's toolkit just in case you need to tweak or fix or do something to that drapery hardware so that you can get the check. Washers, are always great to have because washers will kick a bracket up or down depending on where you mount it. Don't forget about your touch-up pens and your paint and stain for your screws, your pole ends, your chips or whatever might happen. A magic eraser, I love that. It takes away marks that you might make on the wall when you hit that iron rod accidentally onto the painted wall. Matchsticks, box of wooden matchsticks. Why? Because if you're using wooden poles and you keep screwing and unscrewing your finial, it starts to wobble. You stick a matchstick into the hole and twist it. It'll grab the wood and tighten up. Black tape, because you can usually use that as an adapter if the base is too large. Allen wrench kit, in case they didn't pack the Allen wrench screw with you. Cable ties, a sock. If you're, I always like to put a sock on my steamer so it doesn't fit. These are certainly lessons that I've learned from my installers, and it'll save you not only time, but you'll get that check at the end of the install. Steal this idea. Again, this came from one of our Drapery dealer installer forums. There's a lot of back plates that are kind of tricky to install when you're hanging drapery hardware. So photocopy it, tape it up onto the wall, and then pre-drill your screws and screw into it so that you've installed it correctly and at the right height. Thinking out of the box, what new products are coming to market? Whether it's new finishes, new finial looks, H-rail systems, new ripple fold systems, what's happening out in drapery hardware so that you can be showing the newest and the best to your clients. For example, Dura-Lee has a drapery hardware line, which some of you might not even think of Dura-Lee as being in the drapery hardware business, but they sell an Easy Glide tape that you can put at the top of poles, especially if you're doing hand batons. It's included in all of their pole orders, but you can also order it, I think, by the roll if you're not ordering from them. So something to know about. When you apply it, it becomes transparent so you don't see it, and it's a silicone. It's basically a silicone tape. So any questions or answers that hopefully I could have, and while you're typing in those questions, we're going to give away some couple of things. We're going to give away first. We're going to give away a binder. And Ella, if you'll tell me who is the winner of that. Oh, awesome. Got it. Aha. Congratulations, Mary McCormick. You just won a designer binder, which is a binder from Orion with all of the finishes that are in it. And the next winner for the designer bag, which has, oops, sorry, went too far, which has the finial samples and pole samples in it, and our catalog and our price list, and it's all in a great bag. Great way to take it into your client and sell, is Sally Sorelsi. Did I say it right? I apologize if I didn't. Would both Mary and Sally type in your shipping addresses so that we can get that shipped off to you? And I'll take some of your questions. See what we got here. Do I suggest never using telescoping rods? Well, yeah, actually, in my personal opinion, I never sell them. I sell custom window treatments, and I wouldn't, for any reason, use a telescoping decorative rod. Technically, a curtain rod is a telescoping rod, but I don't think it's necessary when you're selling custom. All right. Can you get copies of the charts? Yes, we'll put the PDFs of the charts, Tom, up onto the website, but give me 48 hours to do that, if you would, please. Susan also wants to know if she can have a copy of the measurement sheet, and I can certainly include that in that PDF for you. Oh, show how the drapery bracket was supported for extra weight. Okay, great. I will go back and show you. Actually, what he used was a Z bracket, I believe. Yep. So what he did is he put a Z, this is called a Z bracket. You can order these from Kirsch, and he mounted it below, and then it basically holds it up so it's not pulling down from the extra weight. Let's see. Can you review mounting from the ceiling again? Mary, not quite sure what you mean by that. Type in and let me know. When and where can I get a copy of the charts and the notes? We load a recording of every webinar up onto our YouTube channel, and we also have the links in our blog, so you can go to the Orion website, which is Iron Art by Orion, all one word, .com, and click on the blog at the top of the page, and the webinar links are up there. And I will also include links to download these PDFs next to the video recording. And that includes the charts that I'm going to be giving you is the Drapery hardware use chart, the Drapery weight formula chart, and the window covering measurement sheet. Is there anything else I'm missing, guys? How well do C-rings really work? Are they only good with shears, or do they like more weight? Good question, Peter. Actually, C-rings work great, but what you have to tell the client is that, again, it's not going to necessarily be a seamless function based on your drapery and treatment style. C-rings use gravity and weight of the drapery to allow the eyelet to hang parallel with the wall. So shears are not necessarily going to work as easily as a lined drapery will. So it needs more weight. You also are going to find that if it's a hand-drawn, hand baton, obviously, that the client might have to lift up on the baton a bit as she goes across the center supports with the C-rings. If you tell her these things and you show her these things at the installation, they're usually happy campers. It's when they don't know that and they try to work it on their own and then they call you that they get frustrated. Do I have a chart for measuring fabric with pattern repeats? Sure. Calculating yardage with pattern repeats? Sure. I'll send you something. Yes, the webinar can be reviewed again in its entirety at a later date. All you have to do is click on the link and it will stream for you, Beverly. I was told Mary, have you used metal grommets on a wood pole? Does it work? Sure. I'm sure many of us have. I was told that the metal will wear out on the top of the pole. The client was insistent to use a wood pole to match the interiors, and you have to use metal grommets. Yep, that's the only grommets you have is metal grommets, or you can use the plastic grommets, but I don't know how well they hold. They're not for every installation. Yes, the metal will wear out because grommets are not made to be traversing. Grommets are made just like they were used for tents and awnings to hold, you know, in a corner to tension an awning or a tent. So, and there aren't any grommets that I'm aware of on the market that have silicone inserts. So this is maybe where you want to tell the client that if she's insistent on having a wood pole, possibly she needs to do wood rings with a pinch pleat drapery because it's not necessarily the right look for her. And that's why she hired you anyway, is you're the expert and she's asking for your recommendations. Do I have a rule of thumb for stack back? I have a couple of formulas. The one that I learned from my installer is, because I can eyeball it, I use it because I eyeball it. So I know that my workroom usually uses 5 pleats per width. I figure out how many widths I'm going to have in the drapery treatment, take it times the pleat. Typically on a lined drapery and a mid-weight fabric, the pleat takes up 1 inch of space. So I take the number of pleats times 1, and I add my overlaps and returns, and I get what my stack back is, and divide it by 2 if it's a pair. If that makes sense. Where can you order this? Oh, Cicely, we will send you an email so you'll where you can order the sets from. You can call Iron Art by Orion and ask for Ella, and she can definitely take your order. Overlaps. What size overlaps do I use? Typically, a standard overlap is 3.5 inches. If I'm doing a standard, or if I'm doing a stationary panel, okay, that's on rods and rings, which we seem to do a lot of these days, my overlap is 1.5 inches to 2 inches. So what that does is that puts the ring at the leading edge closer to the ring on the first pleat, and the leading edge tends not to turn into the window, and it hangs straighter. That's why I like to do that. I also like to order overlaps a little bit bigger depending when I'm working in traversing systems or motorization, obviously, or I need to do privacy, so I'm at 4.5 inches sometimes on a lot of overlaps. Okay. I'm sorry, guys, reading these questions. Got 1 or 2 more, and we'll let you go. Tom will email you about your question in regards to the sampling sets after the webinar. And Mary's question was, 4-inch minimum and dead space maximum. What I'm basically saying is that if you're can't mount at the ceiling, you want to mount at least 4 inches down from the ceiling. If you don't, what happens is you create a shadow cavity. It gets dark in that space, and it shadows out, and it doesn't look right visually. I'll send you a picture of what I'm talking about. I don't have it in this particular presentation, Mary, but I can show you where you really see it. Not so much on drapery hardware styles, but if you're doing board-mounted treatments. It looks like it's like this dark hole of crevice, and that's it takes away visually from the treatment. Have you found that heavy-duty rods or Orions tend to bow more than tubular, so the span is actually less? No. Actually, I know that, for example, on their traversing system, you can do 16-foot a rod, and it'll hold 62 pounds. Ella, help me out here, or Tiffany, if you happen to know what the weight or the maximum span is on a 1-inch hollow rod. If you know that, type that in for me, please. But if you're having an issue, please call customer service Peter and talk to them about that. I think we're good. Hope you guys all enjoyed it. Watch for next month's, let me see, maybe Ella came in on this. Nope, don't have that information, Peter. We'll get back to you with that information. Sorry. So thanks, everybody, for attending this month's webinar. Watch your inbox for next month. I think it's right before tax day, the 12th, Thursday the 12th. Oh, one more question just came in. Beverly's asking, operable draperies can be ordered with 4 and 4.5 overlaps for privacy on a pole with rings? Sure. You can specify any size return you need. Typically, if you have a side hem, it has to be, at least 1.5 inches. But you can overlaps or returns. That's all. That's why we do custom. Oh, thanks, Mike. It's we're going to talk about traversing systems on April 9th. Thanks again, everybody. See you next month.